Okay, we're picking up the story from last week. Just to review quickly, last week we pointed out that there are always two ways that, as a habit, it's almost ingrained from the day we're first exposed to Chumash. Is the way that we read always is that we always read stories as genuine narratives, as progressions in time. But whenever we read the halachic portions of Chumash, we always read it sort of as a static. The whole package is there, and our goal is always to give a coherent exposition of the law. So the fact that one law is written earlier than another one and it's not clear, that never bothers us. We just look at the whole package. This part talks about this, that part talks about that, and that's how we look at it. It turns out, with regard to Shabbos, what we discussed was that it turned out that the issue of malacha, of work, by work we don't remember, we don't mean energy expended, we mean creative or constructive acts. It turns out that Rashbam indicated that there was a narrative approach to understanding it. Okay, narrative approach. So and then Ramban. Okay, so we'll review quickly the Rashbam. We'll mention how we configured the whole narrative approach, and then we'll do Ramban. Okay, so let's used to be, remember the sportscaster, what's his name, Warner Wolf? Let's go to the videotape. So this is, let's go to the share screen. Here we go. Okay, so the original verse is in Vayakhel. Vayakhel Moshe kol hadas b'nei Yisrael vayomer alehem ela hadvorim asher tzivo Adonai la'asos osam. 1 second. Give me 1 second. Right, okay. Okay. You all have to behave. We have an Aharon guest today.
Last week too.
Okay. So, Sheshis Yomim Te'asem Alacha, Uvayom Hashvi'i Yeh Lechem Kodes, Shabbos Shabboson L'Adonai. Kol ha'osevo Malacha Yumas, Lo Sava'u Eish B'chom Shvosechem B'Yom HaShabbos. So the automatic question is, if Moshe Rabbeinu repeated that you don't do any malacha on Shabbos, okay? So what's the point of this verse about not opening a fire? So Rashbam says as follows. We're over here by Rashbam. We're reviewing. Lo savaru lefi shebiyamim tovim ksiv asher yachel lechol nefesh hu levado yeyaseh lachem. Sham Hutra was permitted have oras eish lefos ulavashel. Is referring back to Parshas Bo, where the Torah first describes Pesach Mitzrayim, what they have to do the night before they leave, and then the Torah describes what it will be in the future for all generations. And there it says, you do not do any work, but anything you want to cook for yourselves, you can cook. And then later, Aval b'Shabbos ksiv, Eis asher tofu efu miba'od yom, ve'eis asher tavashelu bashelu. And then later, when the man came in Beshalach, what we read last week, the man was given every single day. You only took your portion for the day. And on Friday, there was a double portion. And Moshe Rabbeinu told people, you cook for today, you cook today, and for tomorrow. And indeed, tomorrow on Shabbos there was no man there. So there is no explicit prohibition against burning a fire on Shabbos. That's what Rashbam says. Lekach mazhir ki b'Shabbos lo savaru eish l'meleches ochel nefesh v'chol shekain she'ar melacho she'asurim afilu b'YomTov. So that's why over here we have lo savaru eish. Okay, we have lo savaru eish to forbid even a fire for cooking or for anything. So the Rashbam is very startling because all of a sudden Rashbam has interpreted the law in terms of a progressive development in time. Namely, until now, even though the Torah has spoken about Shabbos at Har Sinai, and it says, Kol malachah lo sa'asu, and over there it says nothing that you're permitted to cook, nonetheless, it is still open, it is still possible. It is still possible that it's conceivable that you can cook on Shabbos. Namely, a person we read in Yisro, Kol malachah lo sa'asu, we read it as what? We read it as saying you can't do anything, and you certainly can't cook. But that's after the fact. In real time, if you were standing in Mount Sinai when the Rebbeinu Shalom spoke about Shabbos, you didn't know that there was more to Shabbos than there was to Pesach. In fact, even not doing work on Pesach has yet to be defined. Okay, so it turns out that we now all of a sudden look at this as a progression. So what Rav Lichtenstein pointed out was the following: if you're taking a narrative view of the development of the law, then it turns out that you really have to look at it carefully, because in Pesach Mitzrayim, we're told about not doing any work, but you can cook. And when the mun comes down, you're told to prepare for Friday. That might mean you can't cook on Saturday. Well, if that's the case, and presumably that's what Rishbam means, it's called a lav habo michlal asay, a negative, a prohibition that is a consequence of a positive commandment. Namely, if you've been told, cook today, you've been emphasized to cook today, the point is you're not going to cook tomorrow. That's the most you have. Then there's Har Sinai, Kol malacha lo sa'asu. Okay? We still don't know what malacha means yet. And then Moshe, after Har Sinai, Mishpatim, Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to the mountain to Har Sinai for 40 days, 40 nights. And there, as Ramban understands, the progression is as recited in the Torah. They're the Parshiot of Truma and Tetzav in the beginning of Kisisa. What goes on there? That's where Moshe Rabbeinu was told about building the Mishkan, the tabernacle. At the very end of that discussion, there's a discussion of Shabbos. And the discussion of Shabbos is Tishmoru. There's a Shomor now. You have to watch it and keep it. There's an issue of Chilul, that transgressing the prohibition constitutes a desecration. All of a sudden, finally in Kisisa, a capital punishment is introduced for violating the Shabbos. And finally, the Shabbos is described as Beini Uvein B'nei Yisrael. It's a bris olam, Beini Uvein B'nei Yisrael Asili olam. Even though the theme of Shabbos is universal in that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, but it turns out it's not only that God told the Jewish people to imitate his behavior, but rather a personal, intimate covenant has been entered over the Shabbos. So then Moshe Rabbeinu is supposed to come down the mountain to tell them about the Mishkan, right? But the whole story is interrupted for the whole issue on Chet HaEgel. So Vayakhel picks up exactly after the Chet HaEgel, namely the introduction of Vayakhel is a mirror image or a continuation of the end of what in Kisisa, where God spoke about Shabbos. And only now do we find out the full character of Malacha on Shabbos. The full character of Malacha, the reason Shabbos is written next to the Mishkan turns out to be twofold. One, that even when you build the Mishkan, you don't do any work on Shabbos, even though you're building the Mishkan. That seems to be the most obvious one. And now, because of Lo Savaru Eish, to include Melechas Ochel Nefesh, all of a sudden, the malachos, the categories of malacha, of creative work on Shabbos, are precisely those categories that were those creative acts, those constructive pieces that people did in creating the Mishkan. So you can, for example, you can't build on Shabbos because you're building the Mishkan, right, etc. Okay. So that's how you look at it through the Rashbam. All of a sudden, the narrative, namely Shabbos, was really through the eyes of Rashbam. Shabbos was not given as a package. You have to remember in Parshas Bo, the issue of eating chametz was given as a package. It told you you're not allowed to eat chametz, and if you eat chametz, there's kares, there's excision. But in Shabbos, it seems to have progressed only until this point, and that's what Lichtenstein's insight is, that the bris characterizes the Shabbos, and the Shabbos is, and in our lives, the Shabbos is characterized by the abstention from malacha. Now we come to Ramban. Ramban functioned as I pointed out last time, Ramban functioned at many levels. And then when he treated the halachic passages, he treated them as both levels. You'll see that in this one piece of Ramban, the second one that I'm going to read, he's going to treat it the way we usually treat it, looking at the law as a coherent whole, and we want to make sure everything is in its right place. And then all of a sudden, it's going to switch to a narrative explanation, very much in the spirit of Rashbam. So let's read Ramban. Today is Ramban Day. Okay. So this is in Yisro, in the Aseres HaDibros. God says, Shesis Yomim Tavod V'Osisa Kol Malachtecha. Inyan Avodahi, Melacha She'eno Lahanoas Haguf, Ka'ochel Nefesh V'Chayotze Bo. Namely, that's a malacha that one does that does not produce an immediate benefit to the body. Right? That's by the Jews in Mitzrayim. That's when God tells Adam Harishon, after he ate from the Eitz Hadas, that you'll have to work the land, okay? And that means Esho Adama. See, it's the second phrase. That's how he's understanding it. Namely, Komalachtecha is on top of the word avodah, and that is what? Everything that is for the necessities of your body and for your pleasure. That'll be a subtle difference when we come down in a moment. Namely, you cook on Friday, right? So Ramban understands now the Parsha of Yisro is actually saying that what? That Shabbos is different from Pesach. Pesach and Bo, you were allowed to cook. Shabbos, you can't do anything. That's how Ramban is explaining it now. Okay. Now Ramban in our place here in Vayakhel. Okay, here we go. Lo savaru eish b'chol moshro sechem. Inyan hakasuv hazeh, the topic of this verse, v'adai le'esor b'shabbos kol meleches ochel nefesh. Ki amar kol oseh bo melacha you must. Upiresh shelo yavaru eish gam efos lechem ulevashel basar. Ki ha'eish tzorach kol ma'achol. At first glance, you begin to think, hey, maybe he's really speaking in the terms of Rashbam. But it turns out he doesn't. At least yet. Later he will. He had to say this. According to Ramban, the kol malacha rules out ochel nefesh, cooking for food. Okay, cooking food. Kasher Omar Ba'aseres HaDibros Lo Saseh Kol Malacha V'Yomar Malacha Stam. Over here in Vayakhel. What did he say? Where is it? Kol Ha'oseh Vo Malacha, you must. See, he didn't say Kol Malacha. Okay. Kasher Omar Ba'aseres HaDibros. V'Hayoav Shor, someone might think because he didn't say the inclusive call, we might make a mistake. Why would we make such a mistake if we heard kol malacha in Yisro? Because he says, Ki chene amar b'chag hamatzos lo sa'aseh malacha. That's in Dvarim, in Kol B'chor, what we read on the last days of Yom Tov. Okay? And there it just says malacha, it doesn't say kol malacha. And we know, ein ochel nefesh b'chlalo. You're allowed to cook. So if one place it says malacha, and another place it says malacha, I might think you can cook. If that's the case, then there's a complete ambiguity in the language of the Torah as what is permissible and what is forbidden on Shabbos. From the Aseres HaDibros, you can't cook. And you might think that over from here in Vayakir you can cook. So here he just made sure that it's clear. So this is what I say where the Ramban is deeply concerned with explaining the Torah as a coherent, the law as a coherent text. Okay, he's not speaking in Rashbam's terms. But now he's going to switch. Watch. Uchalashon hazeh, something similar to this, Matzasi b'midrash. That's the Mechilta. That's a midrash halacha. It's a Tanaitic text. Okay. Rabbi Nassan Omer. He's sort of the end of the period of the Tanaim. Lo savaru reish b'chomosh rosechem b'yom haShabbos lo manemar. Okay. Lefi shehu Omer v'yakhel Moshe's koladas b'nei Yisrael. Shomea ani yehei rashoi lahadlik lo is haner, lahatmin lo is hachamin, v'la'asos lo medura b'Shabbos. I would have thought that even though everything is forbidden on Shabbos, it was still possible to light a candle, to put your cooked food back in the oven to keep it warm, or to light a fire in order to warm up the room. You understand? You see, ochel nefesh is what? Is producing something that is consumed. So there, the fire is a means to an end. So if you're cooking, literally cooking and producing something, Rabbi Nassan is saying, all right, that's in Kol Malacha already, in Parshas Yisro, right?
No.
Right? That's already forbidden. But these acts that are pure fire, that produce nothing, okay? They don't produce an object. They produce heat, okay? Maybe you can do that on Shabbos. Talmud lomar lo savaru eish b'chomosh rosechem b'yom haShabbos. V'zeh karov l'ma she'amarnu. Shelo hayu malachos halolu shehen hana'ol legufo b'chlal isur harishon. Now the Ramban is talking like Rashbam, that the earlier prohibitions did not include everything that is conceivably forbidden on Shabbos the way we know it. See, now he's talking like Rashbam. Okay. Rashbam said that this even included Ochel Nefesh. Rabbi Nassan didn't go so far. He assumed Ochel Nefesh was already in Losasa Kol Malacha, probably. Rabbi Nassan Lamar Shalohu Tzracha Kosuv le'esar afiya ubishul u'sha'ar tzarchei Ochel Nefesh. Shekvar Omar lehem eis asher tofu efu v'eis asher tavashlu b'shelu. Okay. We know that you don't cook on Shabbos already because you cook them only on Friday. Aval adayin kol malachos she'adam neheneh bohem. Anything that a person does that he simply gets pleasure. Ve'enos in ela hana'ol haguf. Namely, it's not tzorchei haguf. It's not something that the body literally needs, like food, but rather it makes things more pleasurable. Kagon hadlakas haner umedura. Medura is a fire. Urichetzas gufo b'chamin, or maybe taking a hot bath. Maybe yumu taros ki ze meyonik Shabbos. Why not? Okay, because they don't have. Namely, they don't seem to be as creative an act as everything else is. Lakach damar lo sava aruesh le'asor hakol. Okay, so you see how Ramban, that the true, in short, whether the Rashbam was aware of it or not, we'll never know. But it's clear already that one Tana in the Mishnah already gave some sort of a developmental exposition of the text as a narrative on talking about a halachic problem. Okay. All right. Okay. So that then Ramban concludes. There's still one more thing about this pasuk. Now he's finished with the pshat. He's now going to talk about Chazal. He's not going to talk about Chazal on top of page. I apologize, I forgot to put the numbers on the pages. Okay. L'Rabbeinu od midrash b'Talmud. Reb Nesha lo amar kol ha'oseh kol malacha yumas. Oshi omar kol ha'ma'avir eish b'chomosh v'sechem yumas. Namely, first he talked about the death penalty, and he didn't say kol malacha to include fire. Or he talked about the death penalty, and then he tacked on the issue of fire. So in Chazal, one person said, Amru, it turns out for simply burning a fire, it is not a capital crime. Cooking is a capital crime, but simply a fire, no. V'yoshomer, shiyatzala chalek. What's lefisha ha'isa b'chlal lo sasa kol malacha. Maza, what's this? What's going on here? Lechalek means to divide, to separate. What is that? That refers to here the introduction of categories of malacha on Shabbos. We have the Mishnah in Klal Gadol in the 7th chapter of Shabbos, Masachet Shabbos, says that there are 39 categories of malacha. And why do we have 39 distinct categories of malacha? It's a technical matter. If a person remembers that indeed it is Shabbos, and in a fit of forgetfulness, he forgets that one is not allowed to grind, let's say, wheat, and then to sift it. Since the two actions, grinding and sifting, are two separate avot malachot, they're two separate categories. He therefore has to bring two separate chataot. This is in one fit of forgetfulness. On YomTov, there is no such thing. In one fit of forgetfulness, he only brings one korban chatat. That's what lechalek means. On YomTov, you don't have that, only on Shabbos. Okay. So that's the level of Chazal. Now, in terms of the way we describe narratively, lechalek is really very good, because it's only here when Moshe Rabbeinu came down that he actually in Kisisa, and here, if you say it's lachalek, this is the place where we introduce finally, in the looking at it through the Rashbam and sort of the Ramban, this is the place where we introduce categories of malacha. Okay. Now the question is, what's going on? Like Rav Lichtenstein wants to point out, and this is sort of a beautiful understanding of Ramban. There's a big distinction between Shabbos and Yom Tov. You see, what he wants to say, and he sees it clearly in Ramban and the Rashbam, is that Yom Tov, some people, it's conceivable, back in Parshas Bo, it's conceivable to interpret when the Torah says, do not do kol malacha on Pesach, but you can cook. It's easy. Nowadays, how would you understand it? In fact, Rashi gives expression to it in Maseches Beitza. Namely, the verse refers to all malacha as we know it, and you can't do any of it. But on Yom Tov, there's a heter to do ochel nefesh, to cook. Okay. The way we understood it till then, through the eyes of Rashbam, we had no idea even what malacha was, no less that we knew what malacha was, and now there's a special heter. If you take the second view, there's the difference in the halacha between Shabbos and Yom Tov is not as striking. One is merely stricter than the other. But Rav Lichtenstein wants to point out that there's a qualitative distinction, and that's the real key. So let's go. So what does the Torah say? Torah says in Vayikra, this is in Parshas Emor, okay? And we've been talking to the Kohanim the whole time, basically. All of a sudden, Vayedaber Adonai Moshe Lemor. I'm on this. You got it. Where I am. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yamartu alehem. Moadei Adonai asher tikru'u asom mikroei kodesh elehem moadoi. These are the holidays of God. And now, Shesis Yomim Te'asem Malacha v'Yom Hashvi Shabbat Shabbasom Mikra Kodesh Kol Malacha Lo Sasu Shabbos Hul Adonai B'Chol Moshvosechem. Okay, we're in Vayikra now. So Kol Malacha, we know what that means. It means nothing. Okay. Then the Torah goes and says, Ela Moadei Adonai Mikra'ei Kodesh Asher Tikru'u Asam B'Moadam. The piece of Ramban is going to point out that Shabbos is really not part of Moadei Kodesh. Rather, he had to mention Shabbos to show that even on YomTov, where you're permissible to cook, when YomTov falls out on Shabbos, you can't cook, etc. Points that out. Okay, and that's number one. Number two, Shabbos, the purpose of repeating this Eila Moadei Hashem is to, he refers to Chazal, that the Jews set the calendar. We know that from Parshas Bo, okay? But what he wants to say is that he mentioned Shabbos, and now he goes back to the main topic, that the main topic of holidays is not Shabbos. That's what Ramban says. I'm not going to read that piece because we won't have enough time. So he says, so he describes the first Friday, the Erev Pesach, Chodesh Harishon, B'Abasol Chodesh Ben Haboim Pesach Ladonai. That's number one. Then it's followed by 7 days of eating matzah. And now he says, Bayom Harishon Mikra Kodesh Yelachem Kol Meleches Avodo Lo Sasu V'Yikrafta Mishel Adonai Shivas Yomim. And again, Bayom Hashvi'i Mikra Kodesh Kol Meleches Avodo Lo Sasu. So Ramban is going to talk about two phrases, Mikra Kodesh and Meleches Avodo. So I have all of this stuff printed here, but you can do that on your own if you get comfortable with reading the Ramban. But let's go to Mikra'ei Kodesh. Let's do that. V'tam Mikra'ei Kodesh. What does Mikra'ei Kodesh mean? Shehiyu b'yom hazeh kru'im v'ne'esafim l'kadesh oso. Everybody is called to come together to make the day holy. Ki mitzvahi al Yisrael lehikavetz beveis ha'Elohim b'yom moed. It's a mitzvah on part of all Israel to gather together in the house of God on the appointed day, lekadesh hayom b'farhesya, that it be publicly sanctified, b'tfilah v'halel la'el b'chsus nikiyah, that you praise and you praise to God and you dress up, v'la'asos yom mishteh, and turn it into a day of feasting. So you have both, correct? It's later on, it was called Chetzio Lashem, Chetzio Lachem, if you remember from the yeshiva days. Okay, half to God, half to us. Commotion Amar Kabbalah. Kabbalah refers to Nevi'im and Ksuvim. That's the story by Ezra on Rosh Hashanah when they wanted to reestablish the covenant with the Jews following the Torah. And when the Jews heard everything that they had failed to do, they were all crying and everything because they really felt totally inadequate. So Nehemiah had told them, eat good stuff. And be sure to send gifts to those who do not have. Why? Ki kadosh hayom la'adonenu, va'al teyotzvu, ki chedvas Hashem himozchem. Do not be sad, because the joy in the Lord is your strength. Okay. So indeed, so the holiday, so that day was a day of study of Torah, gathering together to praise God, and then to actually enjoy with food and drink, etc. Okay. Shesumam takim means they drank sweet wine. So I'm not so sorry, couldn't resist. V'hinei mikra kodesh. What's that phrase? Literally, now he wants to do the source of what's the root. Milashon kru'ei hoida. Those who are called, when we want to gather the zikenim, the leaders of the people, they are referred to as kru'ei hoida. They are the ones who are invited. Acharechen yachlu hakru'im. That is by Shaul. When Shaul, they had lost the asses, and Shaul went to Shmuel to ask for his help to find them. Shmuel then anointed him as king on the occasion. When Shaul first came to the city where Shmuel was, all the girls outside kept chatting him up, so to say, and they told him where to find Shmuel. That he was bringing the zevach, and then afterwards those who were invited would eat with him. And hamakamosha nikraim sham sheyiskabtzu bahem kurei hoida. So yikra means what? Yikra means to gather everybody together. Okay. Namely, he says the word kufresh aleph here is referring to the occasion. Lashon ma'ora. On any day that it occurs, b'chol yom sheye'eru ta'asu asam kodesh. Okay. On those, whenever those holidays come out, you make them kodesh. You make them holy. That's when you really genuinely take what we call a holiday. You make a holiday out of it. Chukam means your daily meals. To change it. So the heart of the Yom Tov is Mikra Kodesh. Okay. Let's see now. Let's see the Ramban on Meleches Avodah. Okay. Yeah. I'm on page 3 now, right? I'm on page 3 at the bottom, right? Okay. The Ramban called Meleches Avodah. These are the two phrases that he's explaining. The phrase Mikra Kodesh and Meleches Avodah. Kol Meleches Avodah. So first he quotes Rashi, and he pushes Rashi aside. He points out that it's impossible to understand Rashi, understand the phrase the way Rashi explains it. And now he says this can't be, okay? So let's go to the top of the 4th page here. Lashon Avodah. Okay. And now he's going to expand on the use of the word Avodah that he spoke about before. Lashon Avodah, he goes back to this. Kolel kol hamlachos v'hashimushim. Everything that a person does, every act that one does for a purpose. Oved ad maso yizbalochem, from Mishlei. Va'avodcha sheishanim, v'yavadato esayavecha. You will, the second phrase, va'avodcha sheishanim, is talking about the Jewish servant. Va'avadato esayavecha is when Jews will be enslaved by other nations, by their enemies. Avodah is not something that if you don't do it, you'll lose it. That's what Rashi thought it meant. And Ramban is pushing this aside. Rashi wanted to argue what we do in Chol HaMoed, Davar HaAved, namely, if you don't do it today, it's going to be lost. That's how Rashi understood the word Avodah. Ramban pushes that aside. And now he says as follows. Aval Perush Meleches Avodah Kol Melacha She'eino L'Tzorech Ochel Nefesh Ke'inyan Shene'emar Sheshis Yomim Ta'avod V'osisa Kol Melachtecha. All right. Okay. Ubechol Avodah B'Sadeh V'ne'avadatem V'nizratem V'kayin haya oved adama, kayin till the earth. And now he says, Umalacha shehi be'ochel nefesh, he meleches hana'ah lo meleches avodah. Meleches avodah apparently is something that is work, that does not produce benefit to the body of a person. Okay, that's how he's explaining the phrase. V'zem is more about Torah. This is what it has to be. Ki b'chag hamatzos she'omar tchila kol malacha lo yeyaseh behem u'tzrach leforesh ach asher ye'ochel lo chol nefesh hu levado yeyaseh lechem. Because the Torah said it back in Bo by Pesach, you cannot do any malacha on Pesach. It had to say, but you can do cooking for food. Okay. Uvisha'ar hayomim tovim yikatzer v'yomar kol meleches avodah lo sasu. Then now he's saying this phrase meleches avodah is now a shorthand for what the Torah said explicitly back in Parshas Bo. The Torah said explicitly back in Parshas Bo, you cannot do any work except for cooking. Now, when the Torah wants to describe it, it simply says you cannot do meleches avodah, and you know what that means. Le'asor kol melacha she'enena ochel nefesh, u'lehodia she'ochel nefesh mutar behem. V'lo yomar hakasuv le'olam be'echad mikol she'ar yomim tovim kol melacha. You will never find by any Yom Tov that the Torah says kol melacha, lo sasa kol melacha. The Torah, after it said it in Parshas Bo, the Torah never explained the issue of Ochel Nefesh. Ki beleches avodah yilamed al zeh. The phrase meleches avodah refers to that. Okay, so this is a very important point. This is where Rav Lichtenstein really says a tremendous chiddush. So he's saying, and it's true. If you check in Emor, every single holiday is Meleches Avodah, but watch out, and Yom Kippurim in Emor doesn't say Meleches Avodah; it says Kol Melecha. Okay, and in Kol HaBachor and Dvarim or Re'eh when they talk about in Kol HaBachor and Re'eh and Dvarim when they talk about the holidays. It does not say Kol Malacha on the holidays. Nowhere. At the most, it says Malacha Savadah. In one or two cases, it just says Malacha, and the Ramban explains it. Okay. So here's the real chiddush of Rav Lichtenstein. Boker Tov Yitzchak. So the real chiddush of Rav Lichtenstein is the following. In Shabbos, the heart of the Shabbos is the Yisur Malacha. That's the heart of the Shabbos. That's what's Kisisa, Shabsosai Tishmaru, Bris Olam, right? Death penalty for Malacha on Shabbos, okay? All right? Achiluk Malachot. And the 39 categories, okay? Shabbos is also Mikra Kodesh. If you notice, when we read in Emor, go back and look at the Shabbos, it's also Mikra Kodesh, okay? But the heart of the characterization of Shabbos turns out to be the heart of the characterization of Shabbos is the Isur Malacha. YomTov, Malacha plays another role. The heart of the characterization of Yomim Tovim, according to Rav Lichtenstein, is Mikra Kodesh, is the celebration of the holiday. That means gathering together in the Beis HaElohim, used to be the Beis HaMikdash, now it's Shul, Lahodos Lahalel La'el, to praise God, and then to celebrate the occasion with food and drink and upgraded clothing. Okay, Ksus Nikiyah, upgraded clothing. That's the heart, the very essence of the holiday. What is the role of not cooking, of not cooking, of not doing malacha on Yom Tov, the role of malacha, of not doing Yom, is to serve the end of the holiday. If you can do all the other malachot on Yom Tov, what's going to happen? The holiday will get distorted. Namely, forbidding malacha on Yom Tov is a means to an end. Whereas on Shabbos, it is the end. The heart of the Shabbos, I don't do malacha. The heart of the Yom Tov is celebration, and I abstain from malacha in order to make possible the fullness of the celebration.
of Rabbi Lichtenstein more than Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer אומר שבכלל, remember the way he cursed the people who left so early in Yom Tov in the drasha?
Yeah, except we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. We paskin like Rabbi Yeshua. Chetzil Hashem, Chetzil Lachem. Yes, exactly. B'diuk. No, Rav Lichtenstein is not saying that you have to watch out. There are two things.
Okay.
And you give a conceptualization, and I'll give it next week. I'll give an example of Rav Meir Simcha gives a conceptualization, and it's only according to one shita in the Gemara, okay? And nonetheless, he has no problems with giving that as the basic. If you give a conceptualization, it doesn't mean that every single opinion holds of it. That's how I look at it. The point is, and the Ramban, he's giving it in the context of the text. That's what Mikroi Kodesh. Rabbi Eliezer may have a different view of Mikroi Kodesh, that there's no Chetzil Lachem. It's another story, okay? But even if, on the contrary, it still applies to Rabbi Eliezer, because to Rabbi Eliezer, coming together to study was the heart of the Yom Tov, and that's Mikroi Kodesh as well.
Okay.
Even that is true. He didn't. The Chetzil Lachem was not important to him. Or what can I say? He's kula. Okay. All right. Chagos V'chol Chag L'Hashem. It was kula L'Hashem. Okay, that's what it really is. But we don't learn that way. We really, the halacha really is Chetzil Hashem, Chetzil Lachem, and Ramban finds it in the Psukim, and he finds it in the Nehemiah. The point is, he wants to say, the Ramban is saying that the verses in Nehemiah were not just because of the particular moment that it occurred that he told them to go eat and celebrate. But rather, Ramban is learning that the pasuk in Nehemiah shows that it's intrinsic to all Yom Tov. That it's intrinsic to all Yom Tov. So what Rav Lichtenstein does is this chiddush of the differing character of Shabbos and Yom Tov, he then shows how in many opinions of the Ramban, you can see this distinction, that the character of the Kedusha of the two of them is quite distinct, and you cannot look at them through the same lens. Namely, what Rav Lichtenstein wants to emphasize is that through the opinion of Ramban, you cannot say that Yom Tov is simply a less strict version of Shabbos. Now, that's looking through Ramban, the eyes of Ramban. Namely, in the Rambam, there's a place that he refers to Yom Tov as Kulo Shabsos Hashem, that even Yom Tov is Shabbos. The Torah uses the word Shabboson for Yom Tov, which Ramban has this particular explanation. But the chiddush of Ramban through the of Rav Lichtenstein through the eyes of Ramban is that there is a fundamental distinction of the character of what the day is, and he shows it in a number of halachot. And what he does is every differing opinion if anybody differs with Ramban in discussion of the halacha, so Rav Lichtenstein digs in to try to see how he looks at this particular conceptual issue. I personally don't get too carried away by that. If one opinion, I never expect that the development of the halacha is always driven by a conceptualization behind it. Namely, it's quite possible that, at least to me anyway, that one version of the halacha gives the full conceptual version of what's going on, even though the development of the halakha, analysis of psukim, the chidushim, and all of that back and forth, that can be quite different. I personally accept that. I don't accept that it has to be driven, methodically through every single opinion. All right, Rav Lichtenstein really struggles to do that, and it's quite amazing. In Ramban, there is a strong consistency between what we have described and what he describes in the various halachot. Okay, that was the chiddush of Rav Lichtenstein. So what I want to do next time, let's see. Next time, I want to do. It turns out, in the halachot of Shemitah and Yovel, there's a similar phenom. Rav Lichtenstein points to it, and he found, and there's a Rav Meir Simcha in the Meshech Chachma, and it's even interesting. It shows up in one of his tshuvos, where the Meshech Chachma, where the Yor Sameach actually also has this same, gives a fuller expression to this distinction between Shemitah and Yovel. And in one way, it's analogous to what we're saying now, Shabbos and Yom. Okay.
I hope you will
it's a very interesting thing. It's number one, the Ramban himself in the analysis of the Psukim, seeing this issue of narrative in the halakha, as we described last time in detail with Rashbam, that was very fascinating. Okay, the distinction between Shabbos and YomTov, and the issue that there's a parallel now between Shemitah and Yovel to what we're calling Shabbos and YomTov. I'll talk about that next time.